The last crimson rays of sunset painted Whisper Canyon in blood-red hues as Eleanor Thorne stood on her weathered porch, watching dust devils dance across the parched earth of what remained of her once thriving cattle ranch. The drought had stretched on for nearly 8 months now, turning streams to cracked mud and pastures to brittle straw. 3 seasons of failed crops and dwindling livestock had left most neighboring homesteads abandoned, their owners fleeing east with whatever possessions they could salvage in creaking wagons. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But not Eleanor. Thornfield Ranch had been her father's dream, built with his own calloused hands after returning from the war. He died defending it from rustlers 5 years ago, and Eleanor had sworn on his fresh grave that no force, not bandits, not drought, not even the railroad men with their fancy papers and slick offers, would take this land while she drew breath. She leaned against the porch railing, the wood warm beneath her palm despite the evening chill. 30 years old and unmarried, Eleanor defied every expectation of what a woman should be in Montana Territory, 1885. Her cotton shirt was faded. From sun and washing, her riding skirt practical rather than fashionable. A Winchester rifle stood propped by the door, always within reach, a habit born of necessity rather than paranoia. The distant howl of coyotes filtered through the twilight, answered by the nervous whicker of horses in the corral. Something felt wrong tonight. The air hung too still, like the breathless moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Eleanor reached for her rifle just as her farm dog, Sawyer, rose from his spot by the steps, hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, scanning the darkening horizon. Sawyer never growled without cause. The sound came faint at first, hoofbeats approaching from the western trail, a single rider pushing hard. Eleanor raised her rifle, sighting down the barrel as the figure emerged from the shadows of the cottonwoods. The horse stumbled, nearly going down, and its rider swayed dangerously in the saddle. "Whoa now!" Eleanor called, keeping her rifle steady. "State your business." The horse staggered to a halt at her fence line. Its rider, a man in a dusty black coat, raised his head with visible effort. Blood streaked his face from a gash at his hairline, and his left arm hung uselessly at his side. "Help!" he managed, the word barely audible across the yard. Then he pitched forward, sliding from the saddle to crumple in the dirt. Eleanor hesitated only a moment. Trap or truth? She couldn't leave a dying man in her yard. She whistled Sawyer to her side and approached cautiously, rifle still ready. The horse, a fine blood bay despite its exhaustion, rolled wild eyes at her, but stood trembling as she knelt beside the fallen man. She rolled him carefully onto his back, and moonlight revealed a silver star pinned to his vest. The sheriff from Coleridge, the mining town 20 miles west. She'd seen him once or twice on her infrequent supply runs, but never spoken to him. Marshall, she thought his name was, or Matthews. "Sheriff," she said sharply, tapping his face. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, revealing pain-glazed eyes. "Ambushed," he rasped. "Devereaux gang, coming this way." Eleanor's blood went cold. The Devereaux gang had been terrorizing the territory for months, robbing stagecoaches, raiding homesteads, leaving no survivors to testify if they were headed toward Thornfield. "How many?" she demanded. 12, maybe more." His breath hitched as pain lanced through him. "Warning ranches, you're first in their path." Decision made, Eleanor dragged the lawman to his feet, ignoring his groan of agony. "Can you walk?" He managed a staggering step, leaning heavily against her. "Not far." "Far enough to my house," she said grimly, half carrying him toward the porch. "Your horse needs water and rest before it drops dead, and you need attention before you follow suit." Inside, Eleanor's home reflected the practical nature of its owner. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy oak table, and simple furnishings. A narrow hallway led to two small bedrooms, her father's untouched since his death, and her own. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and colorful quilts provided the only decoration. She deposited the sheriff onto a chair and lit the oil lamp, getting her first clear look at his injuries. The head wound, while bloody, wasn't deep, but his shoulder, that was the real problem. His shirt was soaked through with blood, and the awkward angle suggested a bullet had shattered bone. "This needs tending," she said, reaching for the buttons of his shirt. "And I won't lie, it's going to hurt." He managed a weak smile. "Already does, ma'am." As she eased the fabric away from the wound, he stiffened, clenching his jaw against a cry. "Sheriff, what's your name? This would go easier if you'd pass out again." "Matthew," he corrected, voice strained. "Sheriff Daniel Matthew, and I've been shot before, miss." "Thorne. Eleanor Thorne." She dropped the ruined shirt to the floor and assessed the damage. "Bullet's still in there. I need to get it out before infection sets in." His face had gone gray beneath its tan. "Do what you need to." Eleanor gathered her supplies with quick efficiency. Whiskey, her sharpest knife heated in the fire, clean linen torn into strips, needle and thread, and her father's old forceps from his medical kit. Her hands were steady as she poured whiskey over the instruments. "Drink," she ordered, passing him the bottle. Matthew took a long swallow, then another. "Not how I imagined sharing a drink with a lady," he said, attempting humor despite the pain. "I'm no lady, Sheriff, just a rancher." Eleanor positioned the lamp for better light. "Ready?" He nodded once, gripping the chair arms until his knuckles whitened. Eleanor worked methodically, her movements precise despite the sheriff's occasional muffled groans. She found the bullet lodged against his shoulder blade and extracted it with the forceps, then cleaned and stitched the wound with the skill of someone who'd tended many injuries, human and animal, without the luxury of a doctor's
Help.
By the time she finished bandaging his shoulder, Matthew had gone silent, conscious but retreated deep into himself to manage the pain. Eleanor cleaned the blood from her hands and brought him water. "Devereaux," she said as he drank, "tell me everything." The sheriff's eyes cleared somewhat, focusing on her face. "They hit the Coleridge Bank yesterday. Shot the teller, the manager, and my deputy. I was out of town, came back to find them ransacking the place." His mouth tightened. "I got one of them, but they shot my horse out from under me. Took another, mount and rode to warn the outlying ranches. Why not go straight to Fort Laramie for the army? Too far. Devereaux would have hit half a dozen homes before help arrived." He grimaced as he shifted position. "They're moving east, following the old stage road." Eleanor moved to the window, pushing aside the curtain to peer into the darkness. The old stage road ran right past her north pasture. "How long do we have?" "They were celebrating their haul when I left. Drinking heavy. But they'll be coming. By morning, I reckon. They don't leave witnesses, Miss Thorne." Before she could respond, Sawyer began barking furiously from the porch. Eleanor grabbed her rifle and extinguished the lamp with one quick breath. "Stay here," she whispered, moving silently to the door. Outside, the moon illuminated her yard in silver light. Nothing moved near the house, but Sawyer stood at the edge of the porch, barking toward the western trail. Eleanor strained her eyes. Against the darkness, there, a flicker of movement at the edge of her property. She raised her rifle and sighted along the barrel. "That's far enough," she called out. "I've got a Springfield trained on you, and I don't miss." "Don't shoot, Miss Thorne," a young voice called back. "It's me, Caleb Wilson." Eleanor lowered her rifle slightly. "Step into the light, hands where I can see them." A gangly youth of perhaps 16 emerged from the shadows, hands held high. Caleb was the son of her nearest neighbor, his family's homestead 5 miles to the south. "What are you doing sneaking around at this hour?" she demanded. "Pa sent me," the boy explained, approaching cautiously. "Riders came through the old Tucker place this afternoon, looking for someone. Pa thought you should know." Eleanor motioned him up onto the porch. "What kind of riders?" "Rough sort, armed heavy. One had a bandage on his arm, fresh-like." Caleb's eyes widened at the sight of blood on Eleanor's sleeve. "You're hurt?" "Not mine. Come inside, but keep your voice down." The sheriff had managed to stand, bracing himself against the table with his good arm. He nodded at the boy. "Caleb Wilson. Remember you from last spring's town meeting." "Sheriff Matthew," Caleb exclaimed. "Everyone's saying you were killed in the bank robbery." "Not yet," Matthew said grimly, "but Devereaux's men are headed this way. How many came by your place?" "Just 3, sir, asking if we'd seen a wounded lawman. Pa sent them north, said he hadn't seen nobody." Eleanor exchanged a look with the sheriff. 3 riders meant the gang had split up to search, some coming along the stage road, others checking the homesteads directly. "Caleb, you need to get home. Tell your father to gather everyone and head for Fort Laramie. The Devereaux gang is hitting ranches along their escape route." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The boy's face paled, but he nodded. "What about you, Miss Thorne?" Eleanor glanced at the wounded sheriff. "I've got preparations to make." After Caleb departed, riding fast for home, Eleanor moved with renewed purpose. She dragged a heavy trunk from beneath her bed and pulled out her father's old army Colt, checking the cylinder before loading it. "You can't stay here," Matthew said from the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. "They'll burn this place to the ground." "Let them try." Eleanor tucked the pistol into her belt and faced him. "This ranch is all I have. I won't abandon it." "Eleanor." "Miss Thorne," she corrected coldly. "Miss Thorne," he amended with a slight nod. "I've seen what these men do. 12 against 1 are odds no one should face. 13 against 2, she countered, "unless you're planning to bleed out before they arrive." A reluctant smile touched his lips. "I can still shoot with my right arm." "Then we have work to do." Through the night, they transformed the modest ranch house into a fortress. Eleanor moved sacks of grain and flour to barricade the windows, leaving narrow gaps for shooting. She brought ammunition boxes from the cellar, positioned water buckets against the threat of fire, and gathered every weapon on the property: her rifle, her father's old shotgun, the Colt, and Matthew's own guns. The sheriff's strength returned. Somewhat after, Eleanor forced broth and hardtack into him, though his face remained drawn with pain. He insisted on helping despite her protests, showing her how to establish crossfire positions and identifying the most likely approaches the gang would take. "You know your way around a siege," she observed as they seated themselves at the kitchen table near dawn, a rough map of the property sketched between them. "Army before the badge," he explained. "7th Cavalry under Custer, though I left before Little Bighorn." He studied her with new respect. "You're handy with preparations yourself." "My father was thorough about teaching survival." Eleanor poured coffee into tin cups, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. "After my mother died, he raised me more like a son than a daughter. Shooting, tracking, ranching, I learned it all. No husband to help with the place?" She gave him a sharp look. "No need for one. I manage well enough." "Clearly." Matthew sipped his coffee, wincing as the movement pulled at his shoulder. Most women would have barred the door and hidden under the bed at the news of Devereaux coming. "I'm not most women." "No," he agreed quietly, "you're not." As the first grey light of dawn seeped through the barricaded windows, Eleanor stepped onto the porch for a final check of the property. The world held the hushed quality of early morning, dew glistening on the sparse grass. In the corral, the horses stood alert, sensing the tension in the air. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Far down the road, a dust cloud rising, riders coming fast. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she counted the approaching figures. 7, 8, 9, 12 in all, spread across the road. Sheriff Matthew had joined her on the porch, his face grim as he confirmed her count. "They'll rush the house," he said, checking his revolver. "Try to overwhelm us quickly." Eleanor nodded, oddly calm now that the waiting was over. "Then we'd best discourage them, Sheriff." They took their positions, Eleanor at the front window, Matthew at the side, and waited as the riders thundered into the yard. The men were a rough-looking lot, unshaven and trail-worn, with an air of casual brutality about them. Their leader, a tall man with a red bandana tied around his neck, raised his hand to halt the others 50 yards from the house. "Come out, lawmen," he shouted. "We know you're in there. Come out, and maybe we'll let the woman live." Matthew caught Eleanor's eye across the room and shook his head slightly. No response. "Last chance, Sheriff," the leader called, "or we burn it down around you." Still, they waited in silence. The leader turned to his men and made a circling motion with his finger. 3 riders broke off, moving to surround the house. Eleanor steadied her breathing, sighting along her rifle barrel at the nearest rider. She waited until he was perfectly centered, then squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the morning stillness. The rider jerked backward off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. In the same instant, Matthew fired from his position, catching another outlaw in the chest. Chaos erupted. The remaining riders scattered, diving for cover behind the water. Truff, the woodpile, the corner of the barn. Gunfire peppered the house, bullets thudding into the wooden walls and shattering glass. "Devereaux himself is behind the well," Matthew called, ducking as splinters flew from the windowsill near his head. "The one with the red bandana." Eleanor shifted position, crouching below the window as she reloaded. "Any others I should know about?" "His brother Micah, the one with the eye patch. He's the real animal of the bunch, likes to use a knife." A bottle sailed through the broken window, flames trailing from its rag-stuffed neck. It shattered against the floor, fire blooming instantly. Eleanor grabbed a prepared bucket of sand and doused the flames before they could spread. "Getting creative," she muttered, returning to her position. Outside, the outlaws were regrouping. 3 men made a dash for the barn while others laid down covering fire. Eleanor picked off one, but the others made it to shelter. Smoke began to rise from the barn's hay door. "They're burning the barn," she said, voice tight with anger. Matthew fired twice more before responding, trying to draw us out, or at least divide our attention. Eleanor's jaw set in a hard line. "My father's horses are in that corral." Before Matthew could stop her, she had slipped to the back door. "Cover me," she called over her shoulder, and was gone. She kept low, using the chicken coop and woodshed for cover as she worked her way toward the corral adjacent to the now blazing barn. The frightened horses were rearing and pushing against the rails, driven to panic by the heat and smoke. Eleanor reached the gate unseen and flung it open. She slapped the nearest horse hard on the rump, sending the animals bolting away from the fire and toward the open pasture. As the last horse cleared the gate, a voice behind her froze her blood. "Well now, ain't you the resourceful one?" She turned slowly. A tall man with an eye patch stood 10 feet away, a wicked-looking knife in his hand. "Micah Devereaux." Eleanor's hand moved toward her belt, but Micah shook his head. Touch that gun and I'll open you from navel to neck." From the house came the steady report of Matthew's revolver. He was still holding them off, unaware of her predicament. "That lawman's shot 3 of my boys," Micah said conversationally, circling toward her. "My brother wants him alive, but I'm thinking we could send a message, starting with you." Eleanor kept her face expressionless, measuring the distance between them. "Your brother isn't doing too well at that, is he? 12 men against a wounded sheriff and a woman, and you're losing." Anger flashed across Micah's face. Won't be. Losing for long, woman. He lunged with unexpected speed. Eleanor twisted away, but the knife caught her sleeve, slicing a shallow cut along her forearm. She stumbled backward, kicking up dust as Micah advanced again. This time, when he lunged, Eleanor dropped and rolled, coming up with a fistful of dirt that she flung into his good eye. Micah howled, temporarily blinded, and Eleanor seized her chance. She drew her father's Colt and fired twice. Micah staggered, looking almost surprised as red blossomed across his chest. He sank to his knees, then toppled face first into the dirt. Eleanor had no time to catch her breath. A shout from the direction of the house told her she'd been spotted. She sprinted for cover as bullets kicked up dirt at her heels. She made it to the storm cellar and slipped inside, heart pounding. Gunfire continued to exchange between the house and the outlaws, but now she was cut off from Matthew. Through the small ventilation window, she could see 4 men attempting to flank the house, while others kept the sheriff pinned down with constant fire. Eleanor checked her Colt, 4 bullets left, and considered her options. She could try to make it back to the house, but the open ground between offered no cover. Or she could remain hidden, possibly picking off a few outlaws if they came close enough. A third option presented itself as she noticed movement to the east, a cloud of dust rising from the direction of the Wilson homestead. Riders, and many of them. Hope surged in Eleanor's chest. Caleb must have spread the word faster than she'd expected, but the approaching riders were still at least 10 minutes away, and the outlaws were getting bolder, moving closer to the house where Matthew fought alone. Decision made, Eleanor slipped out of the cellar and used the smoke from the burning barn as cover. She made it to the chicken coop undetected, then darted to the back of the house. The kitchen door was splintered from gunfire, but still intact. She slipped inside to find Matthew reloading his revolver with his one good hand, sweat beading on his forehead from pain and exertion. "Micah Devereaux is dead," she reported, dropping to a crouch beside him. Relief washed over his face at the sight of her. "I thought they'd got you when you didn't come back. Takes more than that eye-patch-wearing snake to finish me." She nodded toward the window. "We've got company coming from the east. Friendly, I think." Matthew risked a glance. "How many?" "Couldn't tell yet, but if we can hold out a little longer." A crash from the front of the house cut her off. The outlaws had brought a wagon up to the porch and were using it as a battering ram against the door. "Get behind me," Matthew ordered, raising his gun toward the buckling door. Instead, Eleanor moved to his side, Colt steady in her hand. "Not a chance, Sheriff." The door gave way with a splintering crack. 2 outlaws burst through, guns blazing. Eleanor and Matthew fired simultaneously. One man went down immediately. The other staggered but kept coming, firing wildly. A bullet grazed Eleanor's cheek, hot as a branding iron. She fired again, and the outlaw collapsed. Red Bandana, Devereaux himself, appeared in the doorway next, a shotgun leveled at them. "Drop your weapons!" he roared. Matthew shifted slightly, putting himself between Eleanor and the gang leader. "It's over, Devereaux. Your brother's dead and half your men with him." Devereaux's face contorted with rage. "Then you've got nothing to bargain with, lawman." He aimed the shotgun at Matthew's chest. "Maybe I'll take the woman with us when we leave, after we're done with you." Eleanor felt, rather than saw, Matthew tensing to lunge forward in a final, desperate move. She grabbed his good arm, halting him as the sound of thundering hooves suddenly filled the air. Devereaux half-turned, confusion crossing his face as riders poured into the yard. 20, 30, more still coming. Men from neighboring ranches and farms, the shopkeepers from town, even old veterans who hadn't held a gun in years. Leading them was Caleb Wilson and his father, rifles raised. "Drop it, Devereaux!" Wilson shouted. "You're surrounded!" For a moment it seemed the outlaw leader might choose death over surrender. His finger tightened on the trigger as he swung back toward Matthew. Eleanor fired first, her last bullet catching Devereaux in the shoulder. He reeled backward onto the porch as the riders closed in, rifles aimed at the remaining gang members, who wisely threw down their weapons. As Wilson and the others secured the outlaws, Eleanor sagged against the wall, the Colt hanging limply from her fingers. Only now did she feel the sting of the cut on her arm, the burn of the bullet graze on her face. Matthew leaned beside her, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes bright as he looked at her. "You saved my life, Miss Thorne." She managed a tired smile. "And you brought an army to my doorstep, Sheriff Matthew. I believe that makes us even." Outside, more riders continued to arrive, 50 in all by the time the sun stood fully above the horizon. Women from neighboring homesteads came with food and medical supplies. Men organized themselves to put out the barn fire and repair the damaged house. Wilson approached as Eleanor sat on the porch steps, allowing the doctor from town to clean the cut on her face. "Word spread like wildfire after Caleb came home last night," he explained. "Everyone between here and Coleridge knows what you two did, holding off the Devereaux gang alone." Eleanor looked over the bustling activity in her yard. Women cooking, men working, children running errands. Neighbors she'd barely spoken to in years moved across her property with purpose and care, as if Thornfield Ranch mattered to them all. "I never asked for help," she said quietly. Wilson smiled beneath his graying mustache. "Didn't have to, Eleanor. That's what neighbors do." Sheriff Matthew joined them, his arm properly bandaged now by the doctor. Despite his injuries, he stood straight, watching the scene with undisguised wonder. 50 riders, he murmured. "I've been chasing Devereaux for months with no more than 3 deputies, and all it took was one stubborn rancher who wouldn't abandon her home." Eleanor felt warmth rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "One stubborn rancher and one half-dead sheriff," she corrected. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Respect, understanding, perhaps something more. But dawn had brought not just 50 riders to protect her ranch. It had brought a new beginning Eleanor hadn't known she was waiting for. The summer heat bore down on Thornfield Ranch as Eleanor supervised the rebuilding of her barn. 2 weeks had passed since the Devereaux gang's attack, and the property buzzed with activity. Neighbors who had ridden to her aid continued to return daily, bringing lumber, tools, and willing hands. What would have taken her months alone was nearly complete. Sheriff Matthew sat in the shade of the porch, his injured arm now in a proper sling. The doctor had insisted he remain at the ranch until fit to travel, a medical necessity that seemed to please both patient and caretaker more than either would admit. "Wilson's bringing extra hands tomorrow for the roof," Eleanor said, settling beside him with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Should be finished by sundown." Matthew accepted the glass, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Your neighbors have remarkable staying power. I never thought they noticed me much before." Eleanor watched as Mr. Peterson from the general store hammered shingles alongside ranchers she'd barely spoken to in years. "I've kept to myself since Father died. Sometimes it takes a storm to show you what's been there all along," Matthew said quietly. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a wagon bearing the territorial marshal and 2 deputies. Eleanor tensed, but Matthew placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Marshal Green," he called as the older man dismounted. "You're a long way from the territorial seat." Green removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked hair. "Sheriff Matthew, Miss Thorne, word travels fast about the Devereaux gang's capture." His keen eyes assessed the rebuilt barn, the repaired house. "Seems word of your situation traveled even faster among the locals." "Good neighbors," Eleanor said simply. The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "I've come with news and a proposition." He handed Matthew a telegram. "The governor sends his personal thanks for ending Devereaux's reign of terror. There's talk of a commendation." My Matthew pocketed the telegram without reading it. The commendation belongs to Miss Thorne. I'd have bled out on the trail without her. So I've heard. The marshal turned to Eleanor. The Territorial Bank is offering compensation for your assistance in capturing the gang. Reward money plus damages. Eleanor's eyes widened. The drought had left her finances precarious. Such money would secure Thornfield's future through the hardest times. That's generous, she managed. There's more, the marshal continued. Sheriff Matthew, Coleridge is without leadership since your deputy's passing. The town council has requested you return as soon as you're able. Matthew's face remained impassive, but Eleanor felt him tense beside her. And you, Miss Thorne, the marshal added. Several councilmen suggested your ranch might benefit from having law enforcement nearby, given recent events. They propose extending Coleridge's jurisdiction to include the outlying homesteads. Eleanor understood the unspoken implication. The council wanted Matthew to stay in the area, perhaps as much for her sake as for the town's. Heat crept up her neck that had nothing to do with the summer sun. I'll need time to consider it, Matthew said carefully. The marshal nodded. Of course. I'll collect the prisoners and leave you to your recovery. He tipped his hat to Eleanor. Miss Thorne, the territory owes you a debt of gratitude. Not many would stand their ground against such odds. After the marshal departed, silence settled between Eleanor and Matthew. The question of his return to Coleridge hung in the air, neither willing to address it directly. That evening, as fireflies danced across the twilight fields, Eleanor found Matthew standing at her father's grave beneath the old oak tree. She approached quietly, carrying a lantern against the gathering darkness. My father would have liked you, she said. Joining him, he valued people who stand their ground. Matthew studied the simple wooden cross. A good man, from all I've heard, raised a remarkable daughter. Eleanor felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to ask him to stay, not as the sheriff, but as something more. The words caught in her throat. 5 years alone had taught her self-reliance, but also built walls she wasn't sure how to lower. What will you tell the marshal? She asked instead. Matthew turned to face her, his expression softening in the lantern light. What would you have me tell him? The truth, Eleanor said after a moment, that Coleridge needs a sheriff who will protect its people. Disappointment flashed across his face before he mastered it. Of course, I've worn the badge too long to set it aside now. Eleanor stepped closer, heart hammering against her ribs. I didn't say you should set it aside. Just that Coleridge deserves someone like you. Understanding dawned in his eyes. And what does Eleanor Thorne deserve? The chance to find out if there's more between us than a siege and a bullet wound. The words came easier than she expected. Coleridge is only 20 miles away. A slow smile spread across Matthew's face, transforming his weathered features. Close enough to visit regularly, far enough to maintain propriety. I've never cared much for propriety, Eleanor admitted, but I do care for my independence. I wouldn't ask you to give up Thornfield, he said seriously. This land is part of you. Eleanor reached for his hand, her calloused fingers finding his. And part of you now, too, I think. Matthew's good arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. I've faced down outlaws and renegades, but you, Eleanor Thorne, are the bravest soul I've ever encountered. Brave enough to admit I don't want to face the future alone anymore, she whispered. When his lips met hers, Eleanor felt something long dormant bloom within her chest. Not weakness or surrender, but a different kind of strength. The ranch would remain hers, her independence intact, but her heart now had room for something beyond survival. 2 months later, Sheriff Daniel Matthew rode out from Coleridge each Friday afternoon, his path taking him along the old stage road to Thornfield Ranch, where Eleanor Thorne waited on the porch. The barn stood fully rebuilt, cattle grazed in the north pasture, and the rooms that had once echoed with lonely silence now filled with shared laughter and quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. Their arrangement raised eyebrows among the proper ladies of Coleridge, but neither Eleanor nor Matthew concerned themselves with gossip. They had faced death together and chosen life on their own terms, a sheriff who extended his protection to the furthest homestead, and a rancher who had found that independence didn't preclude love. Thornfield Ranch stood as it always had, a testament to hard work and determination. But now it was more than a homestead. It was proof that sometimes the bravest act isn't standing alone against the world, but opening your door to let someone in. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.